Hello, hello. How we doing today, guys? All right. Just double checking everything, making sure the audio is working. Please throw in a thumbs up if audio is good. It looks like it's good on my end here. How's everyone doing today? This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos, and today I want to talk to you guys about the phenomenology of psychedelics. So we're really just getting into the sort of psychedelic experience and talking about the appearances, the experience, generally speaking. This is what phenomenology is about, and we're going to dive into exactly what is phenomenology here in a second. But today, in no way am I supporting or advocating for the use of mind-altering substances. That is not the point of today's video. It's actually to discuss kind of the previous life I used to live. And so if we were to characterize, where people come from when they convert into orthodoxy, I wasn't Catholic, I wasn't Muslim. I was deeply, deeply into the sort of psychedelic spirituality, kind of wrapped up within the general realm of Western esotericism or Western esoteric traditions, generally speaking. And so today, what I want to talk about is what are some of the generalities of the psychedelic experience. And so we're going to first talk about maybe what is the differences between some of these different substances that are so popular. Somebody like a Joe Rogan always advocating for DMT. What exactly is that? What are the sort of general characteristics of people who initiate those experiences? And then what are some of the general characteristics of people's experiences? So we're going to be getting into that, and then we're going to be getting into the false insights. And so I have a handful of personal encounters and stories that I want to share with you, some of which will be a little bit embarrassing, I'm sure, but I thought that would be a good way to really talk about, why I gave up this sort of worldview that's wrapped up, like I said, in the Western esoteric traditions or the spiritual not religious or even the New Age, something like that. And so we're going to be getting into the false insights, the sort of grand delusion people enter when they go deep into these spaces, and why I don't see them as, hinting at or allowing one to discover a truer reality and then to bring that knowledge back. So I'm going to be standing in opposition to much of that, and we're going to be talking through all this stuff. So first of all, let me turn up my bit rate. Looks like my bit rate's a bit low. And so there we go. Looks like it's working better there on YouTube. We got a couple people in the chat. New Age are spotted. Yes. How we doing, brothers and sisters? Hope everybody's enjoying their Saturday, that they are off to a wonderful start this weekend. So wanted to, and again, if you guys can, just to double check, give me a thumbs up in the chat. I'd appreciate that, just so I know things are on the up and up regards to the audio and everything like that, video quality. So, and then if you guys can, please smash that like button as you guys come in. Always helps with the algorithms. And so, of course, we're in the midday on Saturday, so I'm sure a lot of people are busy doing stuff. So we're probably not going to have the biggest audience, biggest live audience right now. Okay. Hey, Dr. Mo, how we doing, brother? Guys, we have the privilege of having Dr. Mo in the house today. So, arguably the most the most recurring guest on Church of the Eternal Logos. He is with us. So shout out to Dr. Mo. Hope he's doing well in the LA area. In California, it seems like it's a bit of a hellscape there. So good to see you, brother. Hope all is well. We need to call each other and have a conversation here soon. But anyways, so today we're getting into the phenomenology of psychedelics. What exactly does all that mean? And What it means is we're going to be talking about the general characteristics of the psychedelic experience. What are some of the general characteristics of different psychedelic drugs? And then, are these truly ways to gain insight into the nature of reality? I argue that no, not necessarily. And I actually have a handful of stories to share with you. Again, some about ex-girlfriends, some about getting into universities, graduate programs, some about crazy, wild experiences about how these drugs affect different people. Again, from my own experience, I'm going to talk to you about my experience at an ayahuasca ceremony. Again, I'm not advocating for any of this stuff. So again, off the outset of this video, I am not advocating for any of these things. The point of this video is to show some of the general characteristics and then why the insights people believe they gain from these substances aren't necessarily true. And I'm doing that by then sharing my own personal experience of grand delusion, of how I fell into these patterns believing that I knew something based on some altered state of mind. And then once life continues, that was certainly not the case. And basically, I was living in a delusion. And so that's what we're going to be getting into. Of course, if you guys are able and you like what I'm doing on this YouTube channel, please check out davidpatrickcarey.com. You'll see it on the screen here. And in the top right-hand corner, there's an option to donate, potentially set up a monthly recurring payment. I would greatly, greatly appreciate that, as that is the main way in which I am trying to get this project funded and do these live streams and these videos. So if you're able to, I would greatly appreciate that, and I'll mention that again later in the video. But without further ado, let's just get into it. And so the first thing that I want to talk about is what is phenomenology, because I gave this video sort of an interesting title, the phenomenology of psychedelics. What exactly does that mean? Well, phenomenology is a field or a school, if you will, within philosophy. And phenomenology is really, if they had to describe themselves, it's kind of the objective approach to subjective experience. And so it's a philosophical school founded by Edmund Husserl. And Husserl, this was in the 20th century. And it focuses on the structures of experience and consciousness and the phenomena that appear in the acts of consciousness. And so that's exactly why I named this live stream what I did, because we're going to be looking at the structures of experience and the consciousness under the aegis of these mind-altering substances. And we're going to be looking at the phenomenon that appear in these acts of altered consciousness. So some of the philosophers you guys are probably familiar with who would fall into the sort of phenomenological school would be something like a Martin Heidegger or even a Maurice Merleau-Ponty. And Maurice Merleau-Ponty is kind of the one that a lot of people cite in regards to phenomenology and using it as an approach to understand the world. And now phenomenology is a great starting point for our video today, because somebody like a Terence McKenna actually argues for almost a phenomenological definition of truth. And now we would absolutely be in opposition to this. Now, why? Phenomenology, and I'll come back to this, but Terence McKenna was very famous for talking about the direct personal experience and how we should root our worldviews, our understandings of truth within our own subjective, direct personal experiences. And therefore, he advocated for people ingesting various substances, engaging in various sexual practices, traveling the world, having any novel experience one can, these radical experiences, even maybe if you're adrenaline junkie, right? This is something that McKenna, and I'm just using him because he's sort of a spokesperson, a very influential figure within these sort of psychedelic circles, right? And so phenomenology, this field, this school of philosophy that's really interested in subjective experience, it's interestingly, when you look into the Alan Wattses of the world, the Timothy Learys, the Terence McKennas, they use a sort of phenomenological understanding of reality to advocate for why people should engage in these things. For Terence McKenna, advocating for radical sexual experiences, orgiastic experiences, homosexual experiences. He says this is all great, right? This is all ways in which we can better understand reality. Now, again, you guys know where I stand in opposition to much of this stuff, but before discovering orthodoxy, before realizing the errors of my ways and a multitude of dimensions, was wrapped up in this stuff as well. And so I want to negate this general premise that we should root our understandings and our perceptions of the world within our own personal experiences. Not that our personal experiences shouldn't color and inform our perspectives. They absolutely should. They absolutely should. However, that shouldn't be the root of our epistemology, the way in which we know things. The way in which we know things need to go beyond direct personal experience. And so this is then where I would advocate for those who are still trapped in the sort of New Age, the spiritual but not religious, or the psychedelic worldview, or what I argue for in my dissertation, the psychedelic esoteric worldview, because digression here, but I argue that the whole psychedelic spiritual phenomenon is actually rooted or a branching off of or a continuation of the Western esoteric traditions. That whole tradition that was rooted in alchemy, Hermeticism, magic, the idea of man becoming God, gnosis, Gnostic yearnings, all that stuff I think is wrapped up within Silicon Valley, the tech culture generally speaking, a lot of the things that gave way in the 1960s counterculture, psychedelics being one of them. And so what I argue for in my research is that psychedelics, when we say psychedelic spirituality, I say that just because you guys will know what I'm saying when I use those words, but how I actually write about it academically is I call it psychedelic esotericism, tying it back to the Western esoteric tradition. So that is why I think phenomenology or the phenomenological experience of psychedelics, or the phenomenology of psychedelics. So why I think that is a good and clever way to title this video is because, one, that is the sort of form of epistemology that the McKennas, the Wattses, the Learys of the world were advocating for, right? One, to base your world experience more on your direct personal experience, or base your understanding of the world on your direct personal experience. And then there's a whole field of study who's interested in this. And so we're going to be talking about the structures of experience under psychedelics, generally speaking. And so I'm sure some of you guys have had experiences. One of the reasons why I decided to even make this video is because I get, given my previous life, for those of you who don't know, I had a previous YouTube channel. It was called Fractal Universe. Fractal Universe, like fractal mathematics, Mandelbrot sets, all that stuff. Fractal, and then universe was spelled Y-O-U-N-I-V-E-R-S-E. So it's like your universe. You could say sort of a solipsistic understanding. I would say certainly that was a dimension because, again, I was wrapped up in all this nonsense, wrapped up in all this psychedelic spirituality, psychedelic esotericism, and the psychedelic worldview. And so my previous YouTube channel was called Fractal Universe, and the whole thing was basically a promotion of and advocacy for psychedelics, spiritual without religious understandings, the use of magic, a lot of the teachings of Terence McKenna, all that stuff. And so I've gone through quite a sort of spiritual journey, and so now I reject a lot of that stuff, a lot of the stuff that I promoted. And what is the way in which I came to a conclusion to reject it, other than taking a more sober and logical approach to spirituality, worldviews, theology, all these things that I was believing in, instead of rooting it in, oh, well, the way I felt when I did this, or the synchronicity, or that, or that. No, we're going to be using the laws of logic. We're going to be using a more strict, a rigorous approach to knowing whether something's true or not. And so this is the way then that's what got me moving into Christian apologetics, because this is the way then we begin to argue for our tradition as opposed to depending on the way people feel during ecstatic states, euphoric states. And so that, again, is why I think the epistemology of psychedelics, something like a Terence McKenna, is always advocating for us to base our worldview on our direct personal experiences, because one, that allowed for the emotionalism in which a lot of people use to determine and orient themselves in the world. Now, again, when we look at the political landscape right now, I think it's very clear to see that a lot of people, whether you start to dive into their political worldviews or their feelings on BLM or all this stuff, that most people are making decisions and based off their emotion. That there isn't a whole lot of logic sometimes in the way people are discussing these various topics or approaching general topics of society. So there's a lot of emotionalism. And given that emotionalism, we've talked about the spiritual but not religious, the New Agers, and how they live in sort of a relativistic worldview. And so that subjectivism, that valorizing subjectivism leads one towards relativism. Now, if you look at Terence McKenna was outspoken against relativism. He identified himself as more of a Platonist and all these things. He was sort of a Gnostic, Hermetic Platonist, if you will. But at the same time, his emphasis on the direct personal experience as one to root one's understanding of the world leads one to privilege subjectivity. And that privileging of subjectivity, though, again, he was outspoken against relativism, generally speaking, as he would say, it prevented people from seeing the difference between shit and shinola. So that subjectivity, I think, is replete within society. And that's why then the people who engage in the psychedelics, the people who participate in a lot of this stuff, are going to align, generally speaking, on the same side of the political spectrum. They're going to say they're going to feel the same way about global climate change. Again, we're going to talk about the sort of animating experience of nature during on the aegis of some of these substances, which then would further perpetuate a sort of paganistic worldview. The whole idea that the universe cares about you, the universe is God, this or that type of stuff. So all that stuff, I think, is rooted in a phenomenological approach to truth, to epistemology, and So with all that being said, what are some of the things that generally appear to people? What are some of the commonalities people say that they've gained from their psychedelic experiences? Well, it's going to be dependent upon the substance, and it's going to be dependent upon the person. Now, again, I'm going to be arguing in this video that these substances do not give you a more direct access to truth or the nature of reality. This is something that a lot of people believe to be true. I don't. And so the concept of set and setting is going to be essential. Set and setting is a concept that was really developed in, it was put forward in the, Tibetan Book of the Dead. It was written by, not the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but a recopied version of that by Timothy Leary, Ralph Metzner, Ram Dass. And so this was a very popular text in the 1960s, and it was almost like a trip companion. And so they talked a lot about set and setting, and this is something that their research at Harvard, we're talking about early 1960s. And so Timothy Leary was a psychologist, along with Ram Dass, or Richard Alpert was his real name. This was before, again, after a lot of these psychedelic substances. Richard Alpert has a fling with a young man at Harvard who was an undergraduate. That's what shut down their whole LSD, their psilocybin research over at Harvard. And so a lot of stuff going on there, but their concept of set and setting, I think, is actually true. That depending on your set, your mindset, and the setting, it's going to greatly influence the experience under these substances. And so if you are in a dark place emotionally, if you have a lot of regret or a lot of anxiety, you've even been doing bad things to various individuals, when you go into these altered states, sometimes you're going to have what's called a very bad trip. And usually you're confronted with things that you would find fearful. again, it's very subjective the way this stuff appears to people. So set and setting, a very common phrase and idea in regards to the exploration of psychedelics. It's greatly going to influence what exactly the phenomenological experience is, what appears, what do people see, what do people feel. So I'm taking the assumption that you're in a good mindset and you're in a safe setting. This is why Timothy Leary and all these things, they would use Eastern meditative practices, ritualistic understandings to ingratiate people into different worldview. So whether if you're familiar with the Millbrook House in upstate New York, after they got kicked out of Harvard, they had this whole place where the biggest names of bands, the Beatles, all these people would come and they would basically give them LSD and they would go through these various rituals. So set and setting, the setting is one that you can control along with your mindset. And now, some of the common experiences or realizations on psychedelics that people talk about, one of them being unity, right? We are all one. We are all one. We are the universe. And so this, at a presuppositional level, we can see leads to a form of Neoplatonism or even a sort of pantheism. I think would be a better way to form it. Not necessarily Neoplatonic, but a form of pantheism where all of creation is God. Somehow it's animate, somehow it's divine. And therefore, when you get on these substances, they, as Terence McKenna would talk about, they dissolve boundaries. And the dissolution of boundaries, I think, is going to frame a lot of these realizations people have, is that when it dissolves boundaries, one of them being the boundary between you and other people. And so you come to this realization that, oh no, all of humanity is one, we are all one big family. And so you can see the movement of like the peace movement in the 1960s, you can see how this moves even to a global consciousness, right? Global climate change. And so the dissolution of boundaries, which is a general phenomenon under these substances, is going to lead people to believe that, okay, we are all one, we are the universe. Now, from a Christian perspective, the way we would combat that, again, is that or the way that we would approach that is that creation and creator, there's a distinction. And so, sure, we are all one in the sense that we are created. We're all one in every human. We all share the same nature. We share human nature. But we are also different. We're also persons. We're also not God. And so next to this sort of unity is the realization that one is a divine being, that you, I, your sister, your grandmother, that somehow we are all divine beings. And this wraps up into what I've talked about with Alan Watts, saying that you are the universe. You are the sort of sentient apparatus of the universe that is perceiving itself. And therefore, you have to realize that, and then you let go of all your baggage, right? You let go of all your baggage, the moral baggage of Christianity, the cultural baggage of wherever you come from, and you realize that all these things are culturally bound, that they're contextualized within a historical time period, that they're not ultimate truth. They're not ultimately describing reality, right? And so these substances are then ways in which you can get to truer and truer understandings of reality based on one's experience. Now, one being a divine being, again, we've talked about the New Age, we've talked about the spiritual, not religious, and then psychedelic esotericism, psychedelic spirituality leads people down what I believe to be an apotheosis road, one where they believe themselves to be God. And this is tied to a whole sense of magic. So if you guys saw my video on the Hermetic tradition, you would be familiar with the whole history of the sort of Hermetic translation project of the 15th century and how the magical tradition or Western esotericism sort of developed within Western Europe, but how they believed man or humanity to be the brother of God, to be God in a way. So these ideas aren't new. They're very, very old. And that's, again, why I typically call these stuff academically the psychedelic esotericism, because it's rooted within that worldview. And so the apotheosis, I think, is ultimately a misunderstanding of theosis. because the apotheosis, if you are God, well, then your will, your desire somehow takes precedence, as opposed to the way we as Orthodox Christianity understand the divinization process is you choosing to be in line with God's will, that there is a God, that God is separate from creation. You can use the laws of causation. You could use the necessary versus contingency argument for apologetics. You could even get into the tag argument for in regards to the presuppositions themselves. But there is a creator. You are not the creator. You are part of creation. You are a contingent entity, meaning you can and cannot exist. You have both those abilities. But if there's a God, he's a necessary being. He has to exist because he's the foundation for all of existence itself. And so the way in which we become divinized in the Orthodox understanding is that we participate in God's will. We act more and more like God. You say, well, how do we know how to act like God? i.e. the icon of Christ, Jesus Christ, all this stuff. So very different approach to the divinization process as opposed to the psychedelic worldview, which is, again, wrapped up in the Promethean, the Luciferian, the Enlightenment understanding that somehow we're attaining gnosis, right? Through these experiences, you take these drugs, you do these rituals, you do these practices, and you're extracting and attaining gnosis, and therefore you're rising in your sort of state of enlightenment. This is a Promethean understanding. This is even a Luciferian understanding of the purpose of mankind and how we elevate ourselves spiritually. So that is certainly all wrapped up within the psychedelic worldview. Now, in addition to that, I say is a lot of people experience love. They experience these euphoric feelings when they go into altered states. This is true, generally speaking, with LSD, with MDMA, even with psilocybin. Now, when we get into the discussions of dimethyltryptamine, DMT, this is Joe Rogan's favorite. This is where, as Terence McKenna would talk about, the self-transforming machine elves. We will get into that in a second. Or even the ayahuasca, which is a mixture of the sort of almost a liquid form of DMT, where with an MAO inhibitor, where you can drink, these various brews that come from the Amazon jungle, and you can go into these ecstatic altered states for longer periods of time. So we're going to talk about some of the phenomenology of these different substances and how they themselves are very different, but the sort of general euphoria, the love conquers all. Again, we see this in the 1960s counterculture, and I'd say that is really tied up with sort of three substances, generally speaking, that people Red Pill Raccoon said, pass that Rogan, bro. Yeah, exactly. And base philosophy, Mom. So glad you made it. So the love conquers all, I think, is tied with the psilocybin, the LSD, and sort of the MDMA. MDMA, ecstasy, if you want to call, or sassafras with the MDM. It's without the amphetamines. Those are much more of a sort of emotional experience, the sassafras, the MDMA. So they're not as mind-altering as you would say the psilocybin and the LSD, especially depending on how much you take. So the love conquers all, I think, again, to this general concept that Terence McKenna talked about with this general concept with the dissolution of boundaries. The dissolution of boundaries tied with this concept or this euphoric feeling of love, I think, leads to a love without boundaries. It's a relativistic love. It's a love that all goes in the name of love. And so now what we see culturally speaking, love is love, right? We see cuties being promoted by Netflix. We see Burger King, the king of Burger King, making out with Ronald McDonald in the name of gay pride. This is all love. Don't you realize love is love? And that this euphoric experience of love being able to conquer all, right? Again, I think it's almost a misunderstanding of how we understand love within the Christian paradigm. But they promote a love without boundaries, and therefore all goes, and therefore you must condone all. Tolerance then is a virtue in and of itself. Again, I think it's wrapped up within this general worldview and where these substances can lead somebody without a more rigorous understanding of how one comes to know anything, right? So love is love. Love conquers all. Love without boundaries. This is another experience a lot of people have. Nature is alive. This is another very common one people have, whether on any of these substances. And to a degree, we can appreciate the beauty of nature. We can appreciate that nature is alive to a degree. I mean, it is living, if you want to put it that way, or does reproduce. It has elements like that, but it is not, I don't think one should be worshiping or praying to the tree spirit, as you'll see some people do in these worldviews. So shamanism, generally speaking. So let's just look at ayahuasca. Ayahuasca, like I said, comes from the Amazon jungle. It comes from the ayahuasca vine mixed with an MAO inhibitor, and this allows you to drink DMT, which is not normally orally active. Okay, so DMT, dimethyltryptamine, what Rogan's all about, this is considered to be the most intense psychedelic known to man, is dimethyltryptamine. And so ayahuasca is sort of a liquid form of this, and when people take it, they interact with the mother goddess. They interact with Gaia, right? If you listen to a Graham Hancock, some of you guys may be familiar with Graham Hancock. He's very famous for his discussions of the pyramids and astrotheology, how they, a redating of history, basically going back to a major cataclysmic event 12,000 years ago. Him and Randall Carlson have done a lot of research together. He's been on Joe Rogan. And so if you listen to Graham Hancock talk about his ayahuasca experiences, a lot of it has to do with interacting with Gaia, right? This mother goddess, this nature spirit. And I'm saying ultimately all these spirits are not God, but the psychedelic experiences lead people to venerate these things in very religious and spiritual ways. Now, these states are believed to allow you to gain gnosis. And this is kind of the basis of why people are so adamant about taking these psychedelics. And I was totally wrapped up in this. And we're going to get into me chasing the entities, my first experience on LSD. Again, I got some wild stories to share with you guys, some of which are a little embarrassing. But the point is to say I've been there, done that. I got the t-shirt, and I'm saying that real truth, real argumentation for one's worldview is not going to be found in doing drugs and altering one's mind through psychedelics. That, I saw one person talk about how we need to learn from the mushroom, No, we don't. In fact, I guarantee you if we began to go into a person's general worldview who's all about the learning from the mushroom, that there's going to be a lot of internal contradictions within their worldview because they're not using logic. They're not using more strict, rigorous analysis to understand the world. They just go based on how they feel. And so the phenomenological experience of the mushroom and whatever realization you believe comes across, like, for example, one of McKenna's realization was for women to only have one child, especially Western women. And this was the idea to depopulate the planet. And so this is where, if we're starting to get into the machine elves and some of the experiences people have in altered states, is how a lot of these ideas tend to align with the globalist agenda, with with the promotion of homosexuality, with the promotion of a central one world government, with the promotion of paganistic understandings, with the promotion of relativistic morality, with the promotion of depopulation of the planet. It is interesting that somehow all these ideas are being conveyed when people get into these altered states. Are they aliens? Are they entities? Are they demons? I'll leave you guys to decide on that ultimately. But the whole basis is that somehow getting into these altered states, we can gain gnosis. And that's the whole point of it. Let's see here. So what are some of the general experiences on the various substances? So as I mentioned, dimethyltryptamine, DMT, is considered to be the most intense psychoactive substance known to man. And so it is a tryptamine molecule. And the tryptamines are going to be the ayahuascas, the very psilocybin mushrooms. Most of my experience was with the Stropharia cubensis, the mushrooms that grow on cow dung. So those, we'll get into it. But the DMT, dimethyltryptamine, there's a whole documentary about this, right? The spirit molecule. This was with Rick Strassman. It was funded by Joe Rogan. And if you guys aren't familiar with my video on the third eye, I refer you back to that video. I have a whole video debunking the myth of the third eye, in which I talk about the research of the spirit molecule and how they're trying to associate the sort of pineal gland as Descartes said, as the seat of the soul, and how it's related to the near-death experience and all this stuff. A lot of this stuff has all been debunked, and it's not true. You know, the pineal gland does not produce significant amounts of dimethyltryptamine, whether it's a near-death experience or just normal activity. So, yeah. Anyways, so what are some of the experiences then people see on the DMT? Well, Terence McKenna was famous for talking about the self-transforming machine elves. And Joe Rogan has also popularized this on his podcast, talking about his encounter with various entities on DMT. Now, DMT is a very fast-acting psychedelic. You generally smoke it, and it lasts somewhere between 7, maybe if you are in there for a while, maybe 15 minutes. So it's generally pretty fast acting. Your body knows how to do with it because the chemistry of these substances actually mimic a lot of neurotransmitters. This is why, one of the reasons why it's not even orally active, and you have to smoke so much for it to become psychoactive. But he talks about interacting with these self-transforming machine elves. Terence McKenna was very famous for talking about their emphasis on language, creating new words, creating new reality, that everything has to do with words and language. To a degree, I agree with this sentiment, especially given the sort of metaphysical and theological understanding of logos, the Alpha and the Omega, God speaking the world into existence. What is God's word? And so this is where I think it gets real interesting at a theological level, is the sort of manipulation of society through words, and then the approach to God as the Word, or Jesus Christ, or logos theology, if you will. So DMT has really sort of become very prominent in our society at again through the Joe Rogans of the world. And I have a couple DMT experiences that I'm going to share with you guys, none of which did I encounter these self-transforming machine elves. And I'm going to talk about how after my first experience on the LSD, I became sort of enamored. This is where I'm an undergraduate. I'm in my early 20s. I experimented with some of these substances, and I, being engrossed within the McKenna and the Learys and the Alan Wattses and the Robert Anton Wilsons of the world, I thought, oh my gosh, I got to do this. I gotta find these entities. I got to contact these entities. And so I went on my own journey through these various substances, never really getting there, thank God, because I feel like the providential journey for me was to realize the nonsense of a lot of the realizations or perceived realizations people have on these substances, and eventually brought me to Orthodox Christianity. And that transition in my life was so dramatic, so fundamental, that that's why I created the YouTube channel I have now, and I stopped doing all the stuff that I was promoting previously. So just throwing that out there. So that is DMT, generally speaking. People go into these altered states. Terence McKenna talked about sort of moving through the chrysanthemum, that your visual perception begins to close. You see the spinning design, whether it be sacred geometric patterns or various, like almost like a chrysanthemum, like a flower, if you will, and that you explode through this thing, and then you enter into a new realm. I don't know if some of you guys are familiar with Grant Morrison. He is the author of The Incredibles. He's a comic book writer, and he's big into, I haven't listened to much of his stuff lately, but he was big into the promotion of magic, and he has this very wild DMT experience he had, which again, he talked to these entities. He felt like he was out almost like on the moon or something, and that he was looking down on the earth. A lot of people claim when they go into these altered states that they're inside the earth. Some people claim that they're inside of a dome. So this is part of the phenomenology of the DMT, is that people claim they're going into outer space. They're either in outer space, they're either like in a dome structure, or inside the earth, or inside like a circus, a carnivore. A carnival, something of this nature. Now, the ayahuasca experience is very different. And again, I am going to share my experience on the ayahuasca. I did an ayahuasca ceremony before, and the ayahuasca ceremony is very pagan. I mean, it's shamanic. Usually you have a sort of shaman. I had a shamaness when I did it. But the ayahuasca people claim to have the sense that they're in the jungle, claim that they interact with Gaia, as I already mentioned, the sort of mother spirit or grandmother spirit. It's very common for people to refer to their experience as interacting with the grandmother. You know, somebody very prominent right now is Mike Cernovich. Mike Cernovich has really been sort of popularizing and advocating for these ayahuasca experiences. He claims he did. And I saw recently he claims that he even interacted with Pachamama. So those of you who don't know, Pachamama was the pagan goddess, whatever, that the Catholic Church allowed at St. Peter's Basilica on the altar. So this is certainly a heresy within Christianity, but Catholicism began to normalize this goddess figure named Pachamama. Cernovich claims this is sort of the goddess spirit that he encountered when he was on ayahuasca. And so ayahuasca usually has a jungle feel to it. Sometimes people claim to see snakes or encounter snakes, talk to jaguars, again, it's kind of rooted within the jungle or something like that. And this is where the vine comes from that people use, or the bark people use to create this brew. And so there's a whole underground economy, really, a whole underground market within California or much of the West Coast, and where these shamans or shamanesses do ceremonies. And so people purchase very secretively. At the last moment, they'll tell you where exactly the ceremony is going to be, and then you travel there and they distribute the substances and get everybody, underneath their aegis, and then they do these musical performances. And so shamans in the Amazon, they sing these things called icaros, and icaros are it's very interesting because there's a sense of synesthesia for some people when they go on the ayahuasca. I did not experience this. I know people who say they have experienced this, and the synesthesia is where it's a blending of sound and the visual faculty. And so these icaros, these sort of very tribal songs these shamans can sing, is how they battle each other. And so within an ayahuasca ceremony, it's not totally unusual, and this is again something that McKenna would talk about, even under his own experience. He talked about it, with his wife and all this stuff, that they'll take the psychedelic, they'll take the ayahuasca, they'll go into these altered states, and the shaman will start to sing the icaros, and these songs then become visual. They see the scenario, they see the colors. Terrence McKenna talked about one time a shooting of arrows that the shaman did. And so these shamans can battle at the sort of spiritual, metaphysical level through the ayahuasca, through these altered states, through the synesthesia. So that's kind of the ayahuasca. Now the LSD is much more different than the DMT or the ayahuasca. LSD, generally speaking, is much more of a cerebral, it's sort of an intellectual. You may see the flowing of colors, the sacred geometric patterns, and the walls or in carpet, you'll see a increased visual acuity. So it feels like your visual apparatus is much sharper. But the word that I use to really describe the sort of LSD experience is satori, right? And this is a Buddhist term. It comes from Zen Buddhism, and sort of these sudden moments of realization. And that's what people tend to feel when they go into these LSD experiences, and it's a little bit of a softer hallucination, if you will, than the DMT or the ayahuasca. Now, again, I'm not advocating for this stuff, and I don't think that LSD leads one towards truth, because from my experience, as I will share, a lot of it leads to sort of grand delusion. Ones who believe, like you believe you have a truth that is more truthful than it actually is upon more scrutiny. You believe something to be true that actually isn't. You begin to live in the sober reality as if something were true, and again, it's not, and suddenly that becomes apparent. So we're going to get into that, but the LSD is much more softer. It's much more cerebral. It's more about a sort of insight into reality. And so LSD is very popular. This is probably the more common one, especially of the 1960s counterculture and all this stuff. So we're going to be getting into my stories here in a second. I do want to mention more about shrooms, MDMA, and iboga, because there is something interesting here. Again, I do not advocate for the use of psychedelics, but I do think that there's something interesting going on with PTSD with soldiers, and maybe the use of MDMA, something like that. So shrooms are a little bit different than the LSD. Some people claim to have more of a visual experience. So upon higher doses, for example, again, Terence McKenna claimed that he could talk to the gnomes. He has all these wild stories that you guys can look up. I'm not going to go through them now. These wild experiences of gnomes who these wild experiences where he claims to be talking to gnomes and all this different stuff. Now, the shrooms, like the LSD, depends on how much you take. Terence McKenna was all about the 5 drive grams in silent darkness, so he was trying to get people to take much higher doses than commonly understood, or what most people actually took. So a lot of people will take maybe an eighth or something. That's a little over 3 grams. He was advocating for 5 grams to 6 grams. And so people would go into these deep altered states that have much more of a sort of entering into a different place, right? LSD, you're here, again, it's very cerebral, it's very heady, it's very, and what's perceived to be insightful, this type of thing. And so the shrooms can be like that, but on higher doses, people claim to experience gnomes, experience altered states, stuff like that. I mean, like altered realities, not just altered states. Now, the MDMA, again, you go to your normal rave, your local EDM concert. Most people are going to be familiar with the MDMA, or ecstasy, as it's commonly called. This is a much softer, milder form of a psychedelic. Again, and it's mostly going to be emotional. You're not going to see a whole lot of visual stuff on the MDMA. But there is interesting clinical research lately in regards to MDMA and PTSD. So, yeah, I think that's something to look into. And also, they've been doing clinical research with shrooms, and that seems to have helped as well. And so also with the iboga, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this psychedelic before. Iboga is actually an African tribal psychedelic, very intense, not a pleasant trip by any means. Most people do not do iboga for fun, right? A lot of people have fun on shrooms, a lot of people have fun on LSD, a lot of people have fun on DMT or MDMA. DMT is a lot more intense. People will just do that usually once in a while. And ayahuasca, you actually get sick. And again, we'll talk about that when I cover my experience on the ayahuasca ceremonies. A lot of people, what's called purging, and you actually drink it, and about an hour or so later, you begin throwing up everything in your stomach, and this is supposed to be a cleanse and all that stuff. So, anyways, those are kind of the general experiences people have. Now, I have a handful of my own personal experiences that I want to talk about. The first experience I had with LSD was, it kind of set me on the path. So I had already been familiar. And by the way, guys, can you please smash that like if you haven't? Again, it always helps with the algorithm. I greatly appreciate it if you guys could do that. So, anyways, back to the conversation. Now I want to get into some of my own experiences. And the first time I did psychedelics was with LSD. And this experience, it was basically one hit, something like this. I was probably like a sophomore, junior in my undergrad. And I felt like, if you guys have seen the movie Limitless, this is kind of the feeling that I felt, is that when I took it, again, I talked about the visual acuity. I felt like I could sit somewhere and like zoom in with my visual apparatus. I could be on the other side of the room and I could stare at something on the wall, and then I could zoom in as if I was standing right in front of something. This was one of the experiences I had. This is, I felt like I had all these insights, really funny thing. And this is kind of what I mean with the sort of grand delusion, is that I remember sitting outside with some friends who were also under the aegis, and I had this huge blanket around me. And just wrapped up in a blanket, I felt like I was almost like an ancient wizard, or I was a tribal person with like a huge cloak. And it's just really weird stuff like that you feel very sincere about. Like, it feels like, again, during that experience, I almost felt like I was in touch with the ancestors, this or that. Don't take any of this to be factual or truthful. This is just like, again, the phenomenology, the experience that one has. And so I thought I had like a major download that night. And because of the sort of wonderful experience I had, and I had been getting into Terence McKenna, I had been listening to a lot of Alan Watts, I've been listening to a lot of Robert Anton Wilson. Some of you guys may not be familiar with Robert Anton Wilson. He's a bit of a polymath, and again, another figure that was very wrapped up in a lot of this culture. So this, what I perceived to be a very positive and fun experience, led me down this road where, oh my gosh, psychedelics are the essential spiritual tool. Like, there is no spirituality without the use. This is how I felt at the time. And it got me chasing the entities. So having listened to Terence McKenna, all of a sudden I wanted to see the self-transforming machine elves. I wanted to talk to the elves and the gnomes and in altered shroom states. So I began taking higher and higher doses when I could get a hold of these things. And so pretty soon, instead of just taking 1 tab of acid. Again, I'm not advocating for any of this stuff. Do not do any of these things, guys. These are cautionary tales. After taking, 1 tab and having a real good time, thought really set me off on this path, that I started to take, again, the 5 grams of psilocybin. I'd go up to 7 grams. I'd go up to 8 grams of psilocybin mushrooms in one setting. Now, a lot of times, once I got into those higher settings, I'd end up throwing up. It was difficult for me to hold down the mushrooms once I got into those higher doses. And I never saw the gnomes. I took a whole strip of acid. That's 10 tabs. That's 10 hits of acid. Way too much. Don't recommend that at all. But again, it's like I was chasing this thing. Somehow, again, I was totally wrapped up in this worldview that, I got to get into these altered states because that's where spiritual truth is. That's where all these entities. This is what all the religions were trying to describe, right? Is these altered states within this is the grand delusion that I was wrapped in, and so What's difficult when you go into these, and anybody who's done the shrooms, anybody who's done psychedelics knows that you're accompanied with a whole lot of synchronicities. And these synchronicities validate this idea that somehow when you go into these altered states, you're gaining real objective truth. And so I can't tell you, again, anybody who's done these knows and if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say synchronicity is just a term Jung developed, talking about how when external reality matches internal states that only you would know about. So these really rare synchronistic experiences would occur when you go into these altered states, whether it be, for example, I remember one time in a backyard by myself on LSD, it's like 2 a.m, and all of a sudden a bald eagle comes and lands right next to me. I know it right now, it's like, okay, so what? There's a bird, but when you're into these altered states, it's weird. It's like the cerebral activity in one's mind is so active that you are continually perceiving patterns, whether they're there or not, and so you're continually perceiving more and more and more synchronicities, and so it just seems like the universe is flooding you with information, and that's why these ideas of these immense downloads is so common for people. Nick says shrooms always make me look at my possessions like my phone or my wallet with total disgust. It does kind of make you feel like a wizard who just wants to quest with a satchel full of fruit. Yeah, it definitely can. So the synchronicities, I think anybody who's done these experiences knows that these weird, very rare phenomenon is accompanied when you get into these altered states. Now, Terence McKenna would talk about how this is because of, again, having a framework for a much more of a mentalistic universe, believe that the altering of one's consciousness affects the casuistry of reality itself. And so getting into these altered states actually affect the casuistry of reality. Is that true? I don't know. I highly doubt it. Again, my understanding of causation is all really under the aegis of God's providence at this point in my life. So I don't subscribe. But this leads to these grand delusions. What are some of these grand delusions? Well, I have some wild experiences, stories. One is one that I actually have never shared publicly, which I'm about to, and it is quite embarrassing. Now, one time, again, this is probably a year or two after I'd already experienced this is probably I'm doing good, Eugen. Thanks for being here, buddy. I really appreciate it. So the first story that I wanted to share about grand delusions getting into these altered states is on LSD. This, like I said, this is probably about a year or 2 years after I first began that first experience that really set me on this trajectory to go deeper and deeper and deeper into these altered states. And I took, I don't even know how much, I took some LSD, and I wanted to be in total silent darkness, so I'm in a completely black, silent room. I put headphones on. I think I was listening to like Taicho. I don't know if you guys know who he is. He makes kind of like ambient music. I was listening to Taicho, and I'm covering my head, so there's no visual stimulus for me. My eyes are closed, plus even if I open my eyes, there's a blanket over my head, and I'm in a room that's totally turned off. So just complete, almost sensory deprivation other than the audio. And I had this weird experience where I was almost like on the top of the ocean. Not deep out in the ocean, but it was at nighttime, so there's like a full moon. It was a bright moon, and I began to slowly sink in the water, eventually getting to the bottom. Again, wasn't very deep, because I remember in this experience, that the moon was still visible when looking up through the water and all this stuff. But I get to the bottom, and there's almost like a treasure chest. I open this treasure chest, and I have a flood of all these different memories and experiences of my ex-girlfriend. So mind you, I was probably 22, 23 years old. When I had turned 21, I had broken up with my high school sweetheart. We had been together all through high school, basically. She was a little bit younger than me, but we were together for about 4 years, maybe a little over 4 years. And I was entering college. I already entered college. I was sort of moving, again, the psychedelic, moving into a new place. She certainly wasn't into any of that stuff. We ended up breaking up. She goes to IU. Now she's like a medical doctor. We don't talk again. We haven't talked since this experience. So once I explain this, you'll understand why again, and the grand delusion that one can be under from these substances. So I opened this treasure chest, right? Remember in this experience, I'm under the water or whatever, and I have a flash of all these different visual almost foretellings, like the future of like a white picket fence, and that I was marrying this high school sweetheart of mine, that we were getting married, that everything was going to be great, that all these things that I wanted were going to come true, that anything, everything that I had been desiring was right there in front of me. I just had to work for it. And so I hadn't talked to this girl in a while. And while high, after coming out of this state, I was so convinced that this was true, that again, because I was wrapped up in a worldview that psychedelics gave you a more accurate perception of reality, that I began texting her. I remember this is like 2 a.m, mind you. And you can imagine if you were a sober person, you haven't talked to me in a while. And now, again, she didn't know that I was high on LSD or whatever. And I start texting you about how I love you, how everything's going to be fine, how, all our dreams are going to come true, that, talking about a house and a white picket fence with kids. Crazy. It's retarded, right? But I remember just flat out saying all this stuff, because based on the emotional response from the phenomenology of the experience, I was convinced that all I had to do was say all this stuff, and it was like like everything was going to be just like I envisioned in this trip. Not the case at all. I remember she hardly responded. And then I'm messaging so much. I mean, she was terrified. I would have been too. And this highlights a sort of grand delusion people can get under from these substances. Not a proud moment. Again, this is where I was talking about. It's a bit embarrassing, to be honest, that that I did all that, and we have not spoken since, and probably for good reason. Yeah, so that happened. That's one experience where you're so wrapped up in the idea that psychedelics give you a truer perception of reality that I totally embarrassed myself. I scared this girl who had known me for so many years. I mean, I'm sure she told her parents and everything, and I couldn't imagine. I would be so embarrassed right now if I were to see the messages I sent her that night. I probably wouldn't even be able to read them. I'd be so embarrassed. But that's just one experience of many that I've had in regards to sort of these grand delusions. Now, I saw somebody talking about in my video in regards to my journey to orthodoxy. I talked about how on an LSD experience, well, basically the last one I had, I had an experience of to follow the logos. Now, even then, I do not claim that my LSD experience brought me to God. No. I feel I had already taken a class in Eastern Orthodox theology. I think it was a process, and that on this experience, almost God's providence was taking me out of it, because I didn't need that stuff anymore to gain a more accurate perception of reality, or to know spirituality, or to become spiritual, or all these different things. And so, for those who were mentioning that in the live chat there, yes, I did have an experience on LSD multiple years ago that said follow the logos, but that was very different from some of this other stuff, and I haven't done that stuff since. But I have another very interesting experience on LSD, and this one highlights how these things affect people very, very differently. One of them, so by the time I'm a senior in my undergraduate, I was sort of known amongst my friends, amongst the cool people at the university that we would hang out, of the guy who knew a lot about psychedelics, did psychedelics, whatever. One of my friends was a pre-med student. He's a very, very smart guy. Again, this is a different life for me, basically, at this point. Like where I am now versus where I was in my early 20s. But we would go out, we'd meet girls, go to bars, do that kind of stuff. And he was a good friend of mine. He was a very smart guy, pre-med. He's actually, again, he's a medical doctor right now. And he wanted to try LSD. So he came over one evening, and so let's begin from there. So at school, he was asking if he could try LSD. He knew that I was familiar with all this stuff, so I said, yeah, absolutely. He wanted me to walk him through a trip. He wanted to experience this stuff. He had learned a lot about it. He was kind of like a very interesting guy that was really into medicine and like doing like the school thing and getting all A's, but he had tattoos. He was kind of a cool, edgy medical doctor guy, right? And he wanted to try the LSD. He heard me talking about it. We had been friends. And so he asked if I had some, asked if I could walk him through a trip. I said yes. We eventually schedule a time. He comes over one night, and we take a little LSD. Now, I took probably like 4 hits, and he probably took maybe 1. I think it was 1, maybe 2. I think it was like 1.5. 1.5. I think it was just 1, but who knows? Anyways, he takes some, and we go downstairs. So I pull up some lecture from Alan Watts with like a nice visual on the screen, and I'm sitting there in lotus style, just meditating, doing my thing, this type of stuff. And I'm sitting there on the floor. He's sitting in it's like a wicker chair. Some of you guys may be familiar with these. They're almost like a big disc. It's like a big disc with a cushion on it. I mean, you can easily take it off. It's kind of wicker. And then it has a round base on it. And so the chair just sits on this round base, and then you can move it how you want. But it's just like a big disc. And I had one of these, and he was sitting in it. And we're just sitting there, and I have my eyes closed. Again, very spiritual, not religious. I don't advocate for any of this stuff. And he grabs the side of the chair real furiously, really tightly. And I'm sitting there, and I kind of open my eyes and look, and okay, and he's just watching the screen. And then he does it again. And I look over to him, and I ask him, I'm like, hey, bro, you all right? And I'm not gonna include his name in the story. We'll just call him Joe. And so I was like, Joe, you all right, brother? And he's like, yeah, I think so. I was like, okay. And so I go back to just sitting there with my eyes closed, sitting in lotus position, listening to Alan Watts. And then he does it again. And then I look at him, I go, bro, you all right? Everything going all right? And he's not, all of a sudden he's not responding. He's looking at me, but it's like he's looking through me. I was like, oh, okay, this is really weird. Again, mind you, I've took like twice as much as he did, and we're sitting there in the room. This is the first time he's ever done this thing. And all of a sudden he stands up, and he's like, man, I got to go. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? And he just gets up, and he just takes a few steps, and he goes and sits in a different chair. And so now I'm like, okay, well, this is interesting. So I get up, and I'm asking, hey, what's going on? You need something to drink? What's going on? How you feeling? And he isn't responding to me anymore. Like he answered me, said he had to go, and then he got up, he went and sat in a different chair, and he's just looking right through me. I'm right in front of his face. I'm asking him questions. He's looking at me, but there's nothing there. And so all of a sudden he stands up, and like a zombie with his hands like this, he just starts walking, and he pushes over the flat screen TV that's on a stand. So it's a flat screen TV with a stand. It's not up on the wall. And he starts pushing it over. So then I got to go, and I catch the TV, and I'm like, hey, dude, what's going on? And it was like he was trying to break the TV. And I opened the door. There's a door right there that goes to the patio and sort of the backyard. So I open the door and push him out. And I'm thinking, what the hell? The guy's not answering me. He's not seeing me. He almost just broke the TV. Like, what is going on? So I'm sitting there thinking, and then I open the door, and he's coming back, and he just has his t-shirt on, and it's covered in dirt. And he just ran outside and started rolling in the dirt. Just really, really strange. I had no idea what was going on. then he comes up to me and he starts like he starts howling. And I'm like, dude, this is because, again, we're in a neighborhood. We're on substances there. I'm not trying to get in trouble or anything. You know, again, I said I took twice as much as he did. I was feeling fine. I felt like I was in control of myself. And he starts having what appeared to me as a seizure. And I started freaking out. Again, guys, at the time I'm tripping. I'm in an altered state. I don't know what's going on. All I know is this is one of my friends. He's getting ready to go to medical school, and I have never been with somebody who these substances were affecting them in this way. So I start freaking out. I call my neighbor, who is a lifelong friend. So some of you guys who actually know me in real life know that I have a friend who we have been lifelong friends, in our parents' backyards actually join. And so we grew up with each other, and he had 2 older brothers and all this stuff. So basically, his brothers are my brothers, and I grew up with them. Yeah, Nick says, I think the medical term for what your buddy was experiencing is called tripping balls. Yeah. Wait till you get to some of the other parts. So I start freaking out. I didn't know what to do. I thought he might be dying because all of a sudden he's laying, he's howling. And then he's looking at me, and then he just lays in my lap all of a sudden, and he starts shaking. He starts convulsing. This is where I think, oh my God, is this guy having a seizure? Is he dying? Like, what am I going to do? Am I going to call the ambulance? What the hell to do? So I call my friend who lived close by, and he knows. So I called him. It's late at night. He doesn't answer. He knows that if I call him, and then I called him right again, he answered because he knows that it must be something serious. I don't just, normally I would just text him, but the fact I called and then called twice, something must be serious. So he answers, and I tell him, dude, you got to get over here right away. Joe, I gave him a hit of acid, and dude, you're not going to believe what's going on. I think he's dying. I don't know what to do. I'm literally freaking out. So he runs over, he gets dressed, he gets over there, and he sees him, and he's like, dude, just relax. I've seen this happen to people before. These drugs affect people very differently, and you just need to make sure that he's in a safe place and let him ride this out. And I'm like, dude, are you sure? Because, again, mind you, at this point, this is probably about a year or 2 years after I had began these psychedelic experiences, and I was taking a lot, right? I was taking up to 5 to 8 grams of shrooms. I was taking somewhere between 4, even at one point 10 hits of acid. Not recommending that. Do not do any of that stuff. And so I couldn't believe how this one hit of acid was affecting my friend. But luckily, my other buddy who lived close came over and said, dude, just got relax. Just let him ride through this. And I'm like, okay, are you sure? So then I just let him up. And my buddy, I'm telling you, for probably the next 5 hours, was in a different place. He was in the backyard with me and my other friend. He was walking into the side of the house. He would walk into the table. He was having a conversation with somebody. He would roll, and he would just start running and dive into the yard. Just the weirdest thing. I mean, the guy was literally in a different place, and he would literally hurt himself. We would have to try to stop him from walking, straight into a brick wall, like the brick house. That's what he was doing. And this went on, like I said, for probably 4 or 5 hours. Eventually, my buddy leaves, who came over and helped me. He goes home, goes back to bed, and I'm just sitting there with him. And eventually, my friend, he comes and he sits down. So we're at a table. This is on a patio, so there's a table with chairs. He eventually comes and sits down. Again, he had just been walking around everywhere. He'd been talking to somebody. I don't know who he's talking to. And he just sits there. And so I'm saying his name. Again, it's not Joe, but we'll pretend it is. So I'm like, hey, Joe, what's going on, brother? You feeling all right? And he never responded during this 4-hour period. Like after this sort of seizure experience, he was not responding. Like you couldn't get him to communicate with you, but he was communicating with somebody. And then he finally looked at me, and he was holding himself like this because, it's probably 4 a.m. at this point. And I go, brother, you cold? You want a sweatshirt? And he's just looking at me. There's no response. So I go inside and I get a hoodie, and I come back and I literally put it on him. And I swear to God, the weirdest thing, when the hoodie went over his head, and he put the hoodie on. It was like this. He was back. And all of a sudden, he's sitting there and he goes, "Hey, Pat, what's going on?" And I'm like, again, his name's not Joe, but I'm like, "Joe, you there?" And he's like, "Yeah, man, what's going on, man?" And then he's like grabbing himself, like, "Oh, man, what happened to my shoulder? What happened to my shins?" You know, he's looking at his knees. He's looking at his hands. They're like bloody. And then I started explaining to him everything that had happened. And from his experience, he just remembers sitting in the living room with me. And he remembers feeling really weird. And then the next thing he knows, he was basically in an altered state, an altered space. Like he was somewhere else talking to something else for the rest of the evening. And then the next thing he remembers is just sitting there with me after I had just put this sweatshirt on him. And that was my first experience with how radically different these substances affect different people. Before this, like my buddy that lived closely, we could handle these substances, and so we never had any of this stuff. We would normally just have a good time, if you will. And so that it really scared me after that whole thing again. And he claimed he had a pretty good time, and the realization he claimed he had was that he needed to become a medical doctor, and that he was going to become a medical doctor, and now he is a medical doctor. But I'm sure he would have done that without the LSD. The LSD again did not give him the insight to actually go and become a medical doctor, but this was the realization that he had, is that was his purpose. And so he ended up enjoying the evening, but that really, really scared me. And it really showed me how differently these substances affect people. And even Terence McKenna talked about you have to watch out doing any of this stuff with people who hadn't done it before. Now, I recommend don't do it at all. You don't need to. It can be fun. These can be fun experiences, but they don't they don't give you a truer sense of reality. Nate said, my good friend had a heart arrhythmia and was on a ventilator for a month after tripping. Oh my gosh. That's crazy, man. I had no idea. So it was that's another very wild experience I had. One in regards to another grand delusion I had was during my master's degree. So I did my master's over at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And during the second year, so that master program was a 2-year program. During the second year of that program, I needed to apply to graduate school. I needed to apply to a graduate school for a PhD. I knew I wanted to do a PhD. I had no idea what I wanted to study while in the PhD program. So I needed to come up with a research interest. I needed to contact professors. I needed to find people, because that's how the PhD works. You actually have to find somebody basically doing something close to or nearly exactly what you want to do. Then you have to contact them, build friendships, and then eventually they'll be your advisors, usually if that school has a PhD program in X field. So it's all about personal connections, and I needed to do all this stuff. Now, mind you, I'm still deeply wrapped up in the sort of magical psychedelic worldview at this time, and I felt like a lot of the other master students were big, like kind of normies, if you will. And so they were all very serious about, meeting everybody. And I was like, again, because of the psychedelics, it'll all take care of itself. It'll all work itself out. That's kind of the mind frame that I had. And I decided that I was only going to apply to, so let me get to it. So, all this stuff's going on. So it's probably the spring of the last semester of my master's program, and I need to apply to a program. So I'm still doing I'm get into a PhD program that coming fall. I had professors help me. They were recommending different things. They were recommending all these schools to apply to, one of which that I got into and now I'm into now, the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. But I am going over to a friend's house. So there's a big hippie friend. He was a very, very good person, him and his girlfriend. I don't know if they're married yet or not. But they were very good people. pretty much leftist, hippie type individuals, very much in the psychedelic scene. And we had got a hold of some DMT. And so I wanted to smoke DMT. I had never done DMT before. And so the first time, well, anyway, so I go over to his apartment and I try this DMT. We smoke it, do all this stuff, and I have a strange experience, no doubt. So, like I said, the DMT is supposed to be the most powerful of the psychedelic experiences. And it did come on very quickly. So you hit it. Then I just laid back on a couch, closed my eyes. I probably took 3 or 4 big hits. And what I experienced was all of a sudden I was in like a 50s diner. So if you can imagine a sort of black and white tile, red leather booths, silver outlining of like the tables and the red leather booths. It was like the Happy Days. It was like that very 1950s diner feel. And the wall was like a spinning galaxy, and people were coming in and out, all dressed in like suits with top hats. Again, like sort of like a 1950s businessman attire. And I was just sitting there in a booth, and I could hear people talking. I could see people coming in and out of this galaxy. So in my mind, I'm thinking, what is this? Like time traveling? What is going on here? And people were looking at me. I was looking at them. It felt like an objective reality, like I was in a different place. And this is where this sort of intensity of the DMT comes in. Yeah, burning DMT smells like burning flat. It does kind of smell like, it has a very, very strange smell. And so I'm encountering these different entities. They're looking at me. They're looking whatever. Well, the realization that I had during this experience was that everything was going to work out with the University of Chicago. Now, I do religious studies. In the field of religious studies, the University of Chicago is considered to be like the #1 university. Now, I have a lot of objections to some of their recent scholarship and stuff like that, but it's considered to be the #1 university. So if you get into there, you're like the creme de la creme. And I had this realization on the DMT that I was going to get into university. All I had to do was apply. It was all a major synchronicity. The master's degree at the University of Illinois, and then I had a childhood friend of my father's. He was a very wealthy individual who was donating millions of dollars to the University of Chicago, and so I just needed him to write a letter of recommendation, and I'd be into the #1 school in the country. It's like, could you believe this? Like, what is synchronicity? It was all my purpose. This was the plan all along. I couldn't believe it. This was the realization that I had. So despite the advice of all my professors at the University of Illinois, I applied to one school, the most difficult school to get in for religious studies. And I didn't get in. So just like the experience with the high school girlfriend, just a major grand delusion. It was a delusion. It wasn't real. And so what did that do? It brought me back to reality that I wasn't going to a school that next fall. In fact, what I had to do was move home and sell cars. I worked at a car lot, and I sold cars for a year to save up money. And that money I saved up, in addition to my previous YouTube channel, was how I paid to live in California. And so here we go, another experience in my life where totally wrapped up in the idea that psychedelics give you a truer sense of reality, that somehow you can almost peep your head outside time and find information or doings on in the future before they occur. I thought I was going to the University of Chicago. Did not. It was probably a good idea, though, because that experience of having to sell cars, of having to live a real life, brought me out of the sort of student, like if you're a college student, you live in a fake form of reality to a degree. You get your student aid money or your scholarship money or whatever, and then you have a sort of a status within society. Are you contributing? No, not really. But everybody respects what you're doing and all this stuff. So you, as a college student, you kind of live in a false form of, and mind you, I'm technically still in college. So don't do what I do, kids. So just another grand delusion. The the University of Chicago. Yeah. So anyways, that is how are we doing in the chat? Everybody doing okay? Did you locate the other treasure box? Yeah. Yeah. That's hilarious, Marco. Guys, if you can, please smash that like if you haven't. Again, it always helps with the algorithm. Looks like everybody's having a pretty good time in the chat. Block Party Vintage says, I love these stories, bro. I appreciate it, man. Thank you very much. God bless you and yours. And so those are a couple experiences of mine of the sort of grand delusion. Now I have more experiences. I have more stories. I just thought these were some highlights, right? The ex-girlfriend experience where you get wrapped up in too much emotion because these psychedelics, they bring out emotion. I mean, it's an emotional tidal wave, right? You know, like sometimes it'll be euphoria. Next thing you know, you're in tears from appreciation. Now you're back to like a gratitude or a sense of it's an emotional whirlwind. And so, it can lead you in very bad places, just like the story with the ex-girlfriend, just like not going through what I needed to do to get into graduate school, and instead just depend on this false form of fate that I felt like was going to occur. And then be careful who you do it with. My buddy, affected him very differently than it affected me. Now, the next experience the last story I kind of wanted to share with you guys was my experience at an ayahuasca ceremony. Now, as I said, I haven't participated in this stuff in a while. Just haven't felt the need to or the desire to necessarily. But one of the last, it may have been the last time I had taken psychedelics really, was a ayahuasca ceremony that I went to. So again, ayahuasca, this sort of jungle vine, this liquid form of DMT, through a friend, got a hold of this shamaness who was holding these ayahuasca ceremonies and flew down to Southern California where this was going on and went to the ceremony. It's very, very interesting. Now, when we get there, one person asked, Patrick, can you touch on how and why psilocybin affects one's identity to the real world? How can it affect one's identity to the world? Yeah, I can. I'll Jack, ask that question again. I want to tell this story first, and so I don't want to lose my train of thought. But, so I go to Southern California. I am invited due to a mutual friend to an ayahuasca ceremony with a shamanist. And so this is supposed to be the real McCoy here, right? This is the ayahuasca. This is the Icaros. This is this is basically what you're going to get without going down to South America. So I get there. Me and my buddy walk in. We had been late because of traffic. I think anybody in Southern California knows the traffic is terrible. And this was actually out in Joshua Tree. Some of you guys, that's going to make sense. Joshua Tree is sort of a desert national park out in Southern California, outside of Palm Springs. But anyways, I digress. We get there. We get to this house, very nice house, and we meet everybody. It's very clear that most people that are there are very progressive, sort of the hippie-esque, you could say. And we're going to be taking ayahuasca later this evening. So we get there, it's probably like 5 or 6 in the afternoon. It was probably like, we got there like 6. We were supposed to be there at like 5 o'clock. So everybody was waiting for us. And so we meet, we talk, everything's good to go. Now we begin the ceremony. And we all have to sit on our sleeping bags. We're all in the same room. So it's basically like a big, a big C with then the musician and the shaman sitting in the front. And they got all these tribal instruments, different things. They're playing all these different songs. And so the ceremony begins. Mind you, through all this stuff, I have a sort of a higher tolerance than other people. So no matter what it is, be it alcohol or cannabis or caffeine or psychedelics, I tend to be able to take more than other people. Things just don't tend to affect me the same way. Maybe I'm a thick individual, not in a good way either. So they do the ceremony. We have to sort of do a confession. So before you even get the ayahuasca, you have to say, what are your intentions for this experience? What are you trying to glean from it? For me, at the time, it was basically where to go in my future, because I was basically coming out of the psychedelic paradigm. This is why I really haven't done anything since then. I was coming out of the sort of psychedelic paradigm, and I felt like so much of who I thought I was, so many years devoted towards this stuff, learning, reading the books, knowing the scholarship, advocating for the McKenna stuff, I found myself disagreeing with, whether it be the stoned ape theory, whatever, again, that's pretty much been debunked in different ways. I was just coming into a totally different mind space, and my intention was where to go in the future or something of that nature, or how to succeed professionally, something like that. It's kind of a very pragmatic approach. Anyways, other people are trying to heal relationships with their parents. Other people are, in very different emotional states than I am. So eventually, we were given the ayahuasca. It's very thick. It's black. It almost tastes like a licorice. It made my stomach turn over the first time I tasted it. And then we sit there, and we're supposed to be in a sort of quiet, meditative state as they play these sort of tranquil music. And that went on, and we're probably about an hour into it. I might feel nice, I don't feel bad, this or that. But I start hearing other people, so we're supposed to be sitting there with our eyes closed, just sort of in a meditative state. And then so I start hearing something. So I look over, and one of the women, so I'm in between a guy who is married to another woman on the opposite side of this row, and then there's a psychologist, a female psychologist, and then there's me in between them. And so this guy's wife, which was a heavier set black woman on the far left, all of a sudden she started like purring, and I look over, and then she starts moving and in very interesting. And I know you're not supposed to judge anybody when you go into these altered states, and I'm not judging anybody, because again, my buddy, this stuff affects people very differently. But she starts moving kind of very interestingly, and I'm just watching her because I'm not feeling much. Right? I've done the dose. I've done the same dose as everybody else. I'm not feeling much. And all of a sudden, she starts like getting on all fours and starts moving around. Now she starts like growling, and she believes herself to be a jaguar. And one of the sitters had to take her outside so then she could like wander around on all fours as a jaguar. So this is like the first wave, if you will. Like we're not even into it real heavy. And then the woman next to me, she just starts bawling, crying. I mean, just like sobbing terribly to the left of me. Again, I'm in an altered state, minor though, but it's not affecting me like it is these individuals. And so now probably 2 hours have gone by, and now the shaman is offering, does anybody want another cup? And I'm thinking, yeah, I definitely need one, because I'm nowhere near some of these other people, like what's going on. So I do another one, and you just feel this nasty knot in your stomach because it tastes terrible. And so we have a break. I go outside. I almost don't even want to be in there anymore, because just the different energies of people, the music is fine. The presentation of the shamanist and the musician, I mean, it's actually quite lovely music. It's nice to listen to, but stepping outside, because again, mind you, we're in Joshua Tree. We're in a desert where the sky is it was the first time in my life you could see the Milky Way. right? Because you're in the desert, you're in Joshua Tree. There's no light pollution. There's nothing around you. And I step outside and then I'm seeing these stars. You know, maybe I'm a little bit in an altered state through this stuff. I had just taken my second cup. And it's like, man, I just want to sit outside. I just want to see all this stuff. But we have to go in. We have to participate in this ayahuasca ritual. And so we go back in, and that second cup, oh my God, had this terrible and so you had to purge. So you're given these buckets when you go to these ayahuasca ceremonies to basically throw up, because unless you have an iron stomach, you're going to throw up. Like, it makes your stomach turn over. And it's supposed to be a sense of cleansing. This is why it's like purging. It's supposed to be a very beautiful aspect of the psychedelic experience. You know, I'm personally, I don't like throwing up, so I'm not a big fan of it. But after I purged, then the experience kind of kicked into overdrive, and now I was actually having visuals and stuff like that. Nothing too intense, though. Again, nothing was that intense for me. So nearing the end of the ceremony, again, I'm just sitting there on my sleeping bag, and I couldn't help but feel like the whole relativism, the whole spiritual but not religious, the whole New Age vibe of the whole ceremony was just kind of eating at me. But because, again, like I said, I'm kind of moving out of this worldview, yet I'm still participating in this thing, right? So I'm still in it to a degree. But I had some nice thoughts. Basically, the whole weekend, what did I claim? What did I take? Because we haven't even got to the second night. This is a 2-night ordeal. What did I take from it was that the first night was just an appreciation for my family, because the reason why the psychologist was bawling her eyes out basically the whole night is she had these terrible traumatic experiences with her mother growing up, and she had a terrible relationship with her father or I don't know, with her father, or at least with her mother. And that was like what she was trying to get over. And so reliving some of these experiences, I guess, growing up with her mother, not exactly the most ideal situation for me to be in, but having to listen to her cry all night. But I didn't really get into any distressing. I didn't have a bad trip. It was really just, I came to the realization of how thankful I am for my grandparents, which are no longer here, because of the ways in which they lived their lives. Again, very devout Christians, not highly educated, not wealthy whatsoever, just very hardworking, always did the right thing, very admirable people on a moral level. How, because they lived their lives that way, breed my parents, who again are very different people, but are very good people, especially on a more Christian morality spectrum, live their lives the right way. And how thankful I was that they were my parents, because I didn't have to go through, I wasn't dealing with all this trauma these other people had. You know, these other people are at this ceremony basically trying to get rid of or deal with this emotional trauma they had from their adolescence, or maybe through high school, or maybe they're still working on themselves because they don't have I don't know what it is, but I didn't have any of that. And I couldn't help but think that, oh my gosh, I'm just so thankful for my family. I'm so thankful for my parents. I'm so thankful for my grandparents. I'm so thankful for the values in which they instilled in me. And so that was really the realization for myself. And it was interesting because the next day, when we sort of had to talk about what did we come to know, or what did we realize, or what did we experience on this stuff, I talked about my parents and my grandparents, and a lot of the others had similar things where they appreciated, they had a new appreciation for something, or maybe they didn't realize it before the experience, but they had really treated their parents very poorly despite all the sacrifices and things they went through. So anyways, it was very, that was the first night, and so they offer you like a third cup at the end. I did a third cup. I took as much as they would allow me to take, and I never got into like these really weird states where some of these people, again, the woman thought she was a jaguar. Others were just off in a totally different space. They were dealing with entities. They were seeing things. They were in real battles. They felt like they were battling things. None of that really happened to me. I just felt like I was totally there, just normal, maybe a slightly altered. And this could be because I talked about my DMT experience with the going to the University of Chicago and thinking all that stuff. That was actually a very unique experience because I had tried DMT probably 5 times in my life. I never launched out. You know, people talk about, oh, did you break through? Right? If you talk to somebody, they'll say, oh, did you break through? Did you go into this other state, this other realm? I never broke through. I never. And so looking it up, you know, there's about 10% of the population that actually aren't affected by DMT the way as other people are. And I think that includes myself. And I think that's why the DMT experiences and the ayahuasca was never that intense for me. Whereas for other people, they're in like totally different places, like totally different realities. So, yeah, that was my first night. And the second night was a similar experience. I took as much ayahuasca as the shaman would give me, and other people were in very different places, and I was basically just sitting there enjoying the music. Couldn't wait till it was over so I could just go outside and stare at the stars, because that was my favorite thing, even before the ayahuasca. Just generally speaking, with the psychedelic, a lot of times I took them all by myself. My favorite thing was to sit outside by myself and then have quote unquote realizations, satori, right? The insights into reality. All of which, again, this video is negating, because that is not really how you get realizations and insight into reality. And so that whole mind frame was the problem. That's also why I've really never even gone back to them, because the things that people think they get from it. Now, maybe emotional trauma. This is where, you know, I'm still open, like the clinical research with the MDMA. Maybe there is something going into these altered states and dealing with emotional trauma. I don't have a lot of emotional trauma. Maybe that's why then that whole thing with the ex-girlfriend, all that's tied with emotion and all this stuff, and then just absolutely embarrassing myself by saying all the things that I said, talking about children and marriage and how much I loved her and this and that. Again, we hadn't talked for probably over a year, maybe 2 years, maybe 3. I don't even know how long it was, but it had been a while. And so at the end of the ayahuasca experience, everybody was nice. It seemed like they were genuine people, but I couldn't help, because I was getting into, like I said, I was coming out of this. I had been reading about Logos theology. I began reading a little bit of the Eastern Orthodox stuff, and it just rang true to me. And so I was using a different rubric for understanding something to be true, and then being at this ayahuasca ceremony, then questioning the shamaness, questioning some of the people that worked. It was all emotion, right? The homosexuality stuff was great. They're you know, the whole worldview. I realized, you know, as you guys know, it's not like that's a big realization, but for me at the time, just seeing how all this stuff was really in opposition to what I ultimately believed to be true, and yeah, and since then it was like talking to shaman. We went to a restaurant after the whole ayahuasca ceremony was over, and then started asking her about spirituality. Again, she believed, like, in perennialism, all religions lead to the same truth and this or that, and then trying to explain to her, well, that couldn't be true, this or that, and then she would reject it. And I started to, you know, that helped submit me that, okay, these people aren't necessarily into what's true, they're into what feels good. And sometimes these psychedelic experiences, sometimes they don't feel good, but then at later words they feel good. But it is all rooted in a sort of deep emotionalism, and so when we look at then society itself, I almost think there's a strong bifurcation right now in society. Look at the COVID-19 stuff, and look who is manipulated based on decisions rooted in emotions, and those who have a sort of critical thinking. This is the biggest thing that's been shocking to me with the COVID stuff, is how few people have a real sense of critical analysis. I mean, again, we don't even have to get into the 6%, the CDC redoing the numbers, but I mean, medical doctors, dentists that I know, professionals, you know, very smart individuals, surgeons, internal medicine doctors, like how it's just incredible how they don't see through some of this stuff, even though when you start talking to them, you bring it up like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But the critical thinking skills has really showed that intelligence has nothing to do with education, and critical skills and like analyzing the world has nothing to do with quote unquote intelligence. I know a lot of intelligent people who are very fearful of this stuff still in September. I mean, does nobody know that virology, that the virus gets weaker and weaker as it goes on? Anyways, so basically that ayahuasca ceremony helped me get out of that whole psychedelic paradigm. And since then, you know, I've been working on a totally different basis. You know, I've been very much interested in, you know, what can I know, you know, that sobriety, that, you know, getting into these altered states isn't going to give you something true. That honestly looking for truth is how you're going to, again, become more self-critical and then eventually find truth. And that's where, again, Jesus, the Logos, is at the bottom of this rabbit hole. And since then, that's kind of the path that I've been on, and I haven't turned back since. So these are my cautionary tales and the wild stories from the phenomenology of my experience with psychedelics. Feel free, guys, if you have any questions or comments in the chat, I'll read some now. Looks like we have one super chat. Oh, it's Eugen. And he threw in, oh, man, thanks for the £5, Eugen. Always helping me out. I really appreciate it, brother. He said, great stream, my man. Really interesting topic. Yeah, it is an interesting topic. And again, the point of today's video was to highlight that, yeah, I've done the whole psychedelic stuff. I've taken all the psychedelics. The point is, these things don't bring you closer and closer to like real truth. And so the whole grand delusion that somehow they do, and that taking these substances and getting into altered states, that's what I wanted to show isn't true. And that I have multiple experiences to prove that. But thank you, brother, for the £5. And I'm glad that I maintained some people's interest throughout this stuff, because I know for the orthodox, you know, it's like, I know a lot of you guys haven't engaged in this stuff, and I'm not telling you to, and I don't want it to seem like I make it sound really cool. We're like, oh, geez, like I want to do that. But at the same time, I want to be super honest and talk about things, because the honesty that I deliver through these things, I think, help build better connections, you know, truer relationships with individuals. That, you know, I'm not here to play a game. I'm not trying to fool anybody. You know, I'm here to just to try to educate, try to talk about different things, and be a very honest individual doing so. So I'm glad you guys like it. Hope you enjoyed it. Does Orthodox Christianity have a stance on what these altered realities are? Yeah, so Mr. Trace, I think that Orthodoxy would say you'd have to be leery of prelest. You'd have to be leery of these delusional realms that essentially you're led by demons. And this is where I would probably agree. This is why the whole video is about grand delusions and how you're led and manipulated, usually based on emotion, right? Like my conviction that I was going to get into the University of Chicago, but didn't happen. My conviction that, oh my God, I just realized that the future of my whole life is with this ex-girlfriend that I haven't talked to, and now I got to tell her everything about what I've just seen in the middle of like 3 a.m. after we had, you know, just absolutely embarrassing. So I think Orthodox Christianity would talk about the necessity to be leery of prelest, and so the Stoic idea of sobriety, which Christianity picked up, is because we always have to be on guard. We always might. You never know when you're going to be called to be a soldier of God, and therefore you need to be in a good, clear mind state. Because how can you evangelize? How can you do the bidding of God's will if, as soon as that is needed, you know, you're 5 tabs into an LSD trip? You know, it's going to be quite difficult. So, Block Party Vintage threw in $10. Thank you very much, brother. I truly, truly appreciate it. He says, keep up the good work, brother. Well, thank you, man. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for the $10. Again, thank you, Eugen, for the £5. I greatly appreciate this, guys. I really do. So, I'm glad you guys enjoyed my little voyage through my own stories in regards to psychedelics and some of my psychedelic experiences. Enslaved by Truth said, love your channel, brother. Thank you for all the work. Amazing content. Well, thank you, brother. And I'm glad that you glean something from my channel and my videos, my live streams. Nicophorus says, I believe the entities in these alternate realities would often be seen as demonic. I'm not sure where it actually is, though. No, I agree. I agree that in one way or another they are demonic, and that's why I was highlighting how interesting it is that some of these realizations, like the depopulation that Terence McKenna was advocating for based on his experience with the self-transforming machine elves, or I think it may have been actually the mushroom that told him about the depopulation, because as one of the guys in the chat was all about, you could tell he was still wrapped up in the psychedelic worldview where we needed to listen to the mushroom, right? The mushroom is an animate entity. This is what they believe. And Terence McKenna even argued that the mushroom was an actual alien. It was an actual alien, and this is because the spores can exist in deep space and all this stuff. Some of the structures of psilocybin mushrooms are actually very, very unique on the planet. So this is why he was arguing for this stuff. But the idea that somehow we have to listen to the mushroom, right? The mushroom is who we need to get our source of wisdom from. This is a problem. The mushroom is created. Again, when you're in the psychedelic worldview, you're not thinking that way. You're not thinking about creator, creation, logical consistency, coherency of a worldview. How do I count for the things that I believe to be true? You're not thinking in those ways. It's always rooted in emotion. And so you can take mushrooms, you can feel really nice. And according to Terence McKenna, which I never experienced this, that there is an animate voice with the mushroom. Terence McKenna would claim that with these 5 dried grams or more, you could sit in silent darkness, and eventually the mushroom experience would come on, and you could talk to it. You could get questions from it. You could have questions and answers. I never experienced that, but again, why are we directing ultimate questions to a mushroom and not to God? That's the fundamental problem. That's the fundamental problem. Is all of a sudden the mushroom becomes a god or an ultimate source of authority for people, but these things lead to grand delusions, and that's why the depopulation, the homosexuality, the transcending of boundaries, the transsexualism, all these things are condoned in a psychedelic paradigm and a psychedelic morality and a relativistic worldview in which, again, beginning this video, their epistemology is rooted in phenomenology. It's rooted in personal experience. Well, that's not going to lead you to ultimate truth, in my opinion. The only way to do that is to actually live your life in a moral way and pray to God and actually pursue truth. Like really in the deepest heart of your heart, you're pursuing real truth. And I think it's actually going to lead you away from these things as opposed to bring you towards them. I think that if you have a vice, if you have addiction of some sort, that is what's going to bring you towards the psychedelics, or even thinking that the mushrooms are the things that you need to ask your ultimate question towards so they can give you answers. That's why so many of these patterns lead to the same global homo agenda. Is it demonic? Well, it sure seems like there's patterns there that the things that these entities, whether it's the self-transforming machine elves, whether it's the gnomes in the mushroom experience, whether it's the animated mushroom itself, it seems like a lot of the advice, a lot of the ideas they put forth are all consistent with the global homo agenda that we are in opposition to, that hates masculinity, and even the ego, right? I mean, Terence McKenna was all about the male dominator ego and how the psychedelics destroyed the ego, the dissolution of boundaries, dissolving, because again, men create boundaries. The ego, if we want to use McKenna's term, is a sort of phallic psychological object, but it's the men who create boundaries. It's the men who define society. And so when we get into these psychedelic states, just like how the cannabis, is a female plant, right? The male plant is hemp. You don't get high from hemp. The female plant, cannabis, is how you get high. And so the lowering of T rates, the feminization of men, I think all this stuff is slightly tied to the perpetuation and the use of psychedelics, cannabis, drug culture in general is all a sort of feminization, and it gets men more rooted in their emotions. And because of that, the dissolution of boundaries, the transgression of boundaries seems more and more normal or justified, as opposed to when you live in a more sober state, that egoic structure is more defined. And so it's men who define order and boundaries. And so I think, again, the phallogocentrism, right, that Jacques Derrida, that the 60s counter, that all this stuff is really in opposition to. It's really about us becoming men and being proud of our egos, using our egos to create better structures in reality. That's how I see it. So, it looks like we got another suit. Oh, Nick Offinger. Hey, brother, how you doing? He says, this was a fun video. Thanks, dude. Well, thank you, brother, for the $4.99. I greatly appreciate that. Really, really appreciate that. Let's see here. What's some of the stuff you guys are saying? Roth Theory 333 said, intelligence doesn't equal discernment. Isn't that the truth? My God. And this COVID and BLM stuff is the perfect example of that. I mean, I can't tell you guys, I'm sure you guys are probably similar, that a lot of people, again, the BLM, the COVID stuff, it just reveals like who you want in your life and who you don't want in your life. Like, I don't need a lot of people to be my friend or to be in my life. I just want people that I can trust and that are on the same page, especially when things go haywire. So this has been a great, I've unfriended and unfollowed so many people during all this stuff that it's actually quite liberating. But I definitely agree. Intelligence does not equal discernment. Okay. Vendetta said, look into Messengers of Deception by Jacques Vallée. UFOs and these entities are interdimensional entities that have been the fairies and no, I don't believe that. I know Jacques Vallée. I don't believe the UFOs are, well, I think a lot of this stuff is all intelligence agencies. Like, do I believe demons exist? Yeah, absolutely. Do I believe that demons sometimes make themselves physical? Yeah, absolutely. Do I think that UFOs are the same thing as fairies or demons? I'm not sure. For me, generally, I think the whole UFO thing is probably fake. I think it's probably just a psychological op by intelligence agencies and the military-industrial complex to usher in a new world religion where, again, we worship creation and worship these very intelligent beings who they themselves are. And they just, and then they use, technology and stuff to manipulate us. That's kind of how I see it. When I took salvia, there were aliens that told me the world was all an illusion. It really messed me up for a couple days. Yeah, exactly. So the world is an illusion. That's the Maya. That's the acosmism I talked about in my terminology, important terminology, theological and philosophical terminology. Acosmism is this idea that reality is ultimately illusionary. In Sanskrit, that's called Maya within Hinduism and Buddhism. Again, I disagree with that. That is in opposition to the logocentric worldview because God spoke the world into existence, and so there is an actual and objective reality. It's not an illusion. And so our worldview as an Orthodox Christian, or Christian generally speaking, is in opposition to the sort of acosmism or the Maya concept. So how interesting, just like you said, you took salvia, and then these aliens say the exact thing that would lead one to the worldview that's being implemented by the powers that be, by the same people who are promoting cuties on Netflix. Are the psychedelic entities demons? I don't know, but it seems like there's a lot of overlap. So the mushroom leads you ultimately. This is from Don. The mushroom leads you ultimately to a delusion that you can create your own world, and that fundamentally all things are subjective. Total bullshit. Agreed. It is not true that experiences are based on emotions. It's not true that experiences are based on emotions. Okay, this is Mush Love, and I think that's Mushroom Love, and he was critical of what I was talking about in regards to the validity of psychedelic revelation earlier. So maybe we just we'll have to agree to disagree. People, you really can benefit from these substances. It depends on who they are, and most people don't need them. I don't advocate for the use of. I don't. If you have PTSD, maybe the MDMA, the psilocybin treatment may be helpful. But generally speaking, if you're trying to know what's true, you need to start reading more. You need to start praying more. You need to start, doing what's right. You don't need to go into these altered states, which then validate your predilections or maybe your sexual fetishes or whatever it is. That's not getting you closer to ultimate truth. And so maybe they can help people get over emotional trauma like PTSD, like the MDMA. But if you're looking for truth, you don't need to go to psychedelics. Joshua Lindbergh said, had enough of the corona lies. Totally agree. He also said, I think it would be really cool to see you and Stephen Baincraft talk. I agree. I should reach out to that guy. No, he recently said he's been in a bad place, and that's why he hasn't posted much in like the last year. But maybe when he gets back to YouTube, I would be more than happy to have him come on. Seems like a good guy, and we've been in similar places. If you close your eyes and press on them, you can have a psychedelic experience also. You may have visuals, but I don't think that's the same thing as a psychedelic experience per se. Can you explain what the stoned ape theory is? JKXY. Yeah, the stoned ape theory was a theory that Terence McKenna and Dennis McKenna put forth. This was an idea that psilocybin mushrooms were a catalyst for the evolution of the Homo sapien. So they posit that we were arboreal apes, and that we came out of the African canopies. And because we were omnivores, we were looking for food. And on the plains of Africa were ungulate animals. Ungulates are just hooved animals. So your wildebeest, your gazelle, your cow, these are all ungulates, considered ungulates. And that ungulate animals were on the plains, and that there were mushrooms growing in their dung. Most likely Stropharia cubensis. This was Terence McKenna's favorite type of mushroom. The most common mushroom. Most people who have mushroom experiences use Stropharia cubensis. So stoned ape theory claims that then these arboreal monkeys who came out of the canopies began experimenting in their diet, started to eat these mushrooms that they found in the dung of ungulate animals on the plains of Africa. Now, from an evolutionary perspective, they have to say, well, why would they do that? And so the McKenna brothers argued, well, they would eat these mushrooms because at a very minor dose, they improve visual acuity. And so I mentioned this with the LSD or even the shrooms. At very low doses, they do sort of do something to your visual acuity. And so they would say, well, if they were hunter-gatherer animals, they would be benefited by ingesting small amounts of psilocybin mushrooms because it would improve their visual acuity. Okay. And then at a little bit higher dose, it increased in copulation. Copulation is just a scientific term for having sex, and so reproducing. And so he said, well, then the monkeys or the apes that it would eat a little bit more of the psychedelics would increase in copulation, and therefore it would be a reproductive benefit. And then those who took even more would have a full-blown mystical experience. And so what the McKenna brothers argued is that the psilocybin mushroom aided in the development of the neofrontal cortex. That has been very controversial and basically has been debunked by most of the scientific community. I don't know of any straight scientist that supports the stoned ape theory. Only people that have an interest in the psychedelic community have really advocated for it. Most people who have some tie with the McKenna brothers who think, well, this seems really logical, and this is probably it because I had mushrooms and I had a great experience, and that's probably what did it. So in a quick overview, that is the stoned ape theory. We got another super chat. Josh threw in $5. Thank you very much, brother. He said, yo, do you think Western Catholic art is bad? No, I don't think Western Catholic art is bad per se. I certainly disagree with their theology, but I'm all. I think. Well, so to expand this question to a larger frame, I'm all for Christian art generally speaking. I think one of the reasons why the West has fallen so easily. And so when you look at like the conversation today on the phenomenology of psychedelics or psychedelic spirituality, psychedelic esotericism as what I call it, they have beautiful art. Now, again, I disagree with the worldview. I do not promote this stuff. But if you Google visionary art or psychedelic visionary art or psychedelic art, the colors, the visual, just the aesthetics are very appealing. And so the appeal, these ideas appeal to culture in a way that I think Christianity hasn't done in a long time. And so when you look at the sort of the Protestant Reformation and the austere nature of their aesthetics, this is why a Protestant church looks like it could be in a business building or something, or a warehouse, or it doesn't have the same architecture and the beauty as a Catholic cathedral or an Orthodox church. That it's symbolic of the decline of our society in general. And so I like Gothic architecture. I really like the Gothic aesthetic. I think there's a lot of Western Catholic art I like. Now, do we have to be careful from an Orthodox perspective? Like theologically, we can't support the Agnus Dei. We can't, even though one of the more famous, it's escaping me, the artist. Dang it, I have it in a folder somewhere. But the Agnus Dei depiction of Christ as a lamb, as an Orthodox, we can't do that. Christ was human. And as soon as we start depicting Christ as non-human, we're going to begin to lose our theology. And so no wonder then that 51% of American Christians don't believe Christ was fully God, or that he was just human, or he was just symbolic, right? Well, he is just symbolic when you're depicting him as a lamb, which then is going to be tied with penal substitution, atonement theory, all this stuff, which again, we're going to be in opposition to. So, but yeah, I think there's beautiful Catholic art. If there's Catholic art that doesn't violate, maybe the dogmas of Orthodox theology, I'm all for it. I think we need more and more Christian art. That's the only way we, the people watching this, you and I, all of us Christians, how are we going to change culture? We have to create art. We have to create more art. Music based on Christian values. Again, I'm not the biggest Kanye West fan, but at least his most recent album, Jesus is King, moving in that direction. Now, are there some problems with it? Sure. But the movement in the direction of Christians producing more art for the masses to consume, these are gateways to move towards ideas. And we see, look at the art that's produced in this country, and where has that pushed us? Why would the Jewish director create the movie Cuties? To move society in that direction. You and I, if God has blessed you with the skill to draw, if God has blessed you with the skill to sing, to write music, I think we have to begin to use these things to alter society, but for the better, to bring people back towards God. And so if Catholic art is one way to do that, now again, I don't support the Vatican, I don't support the papacy, I don't support Thomism, but art needs to be re-Christianized. And we, and you, and I, and all of us can do that. And I think that's going to go such a long way in sort of altering society, changing society, getting people to move in our direction. Because as Don Don says, art for the masses is always degenerate. I don't know if it's always degenerate. I mean, so all the Byzantine art in the Byzantine Empire was degenerate. I would disagree that the volume of art's audience makes it degenerate. But I think we can begin creating art that is more Christian, that leads people in the right direction, leads people to the right ideas and the right ideals. So Josh, I hope that helped answer your question. Thank you very much for the $5. Do you think Western Catholic art is bad? It depends on what's being depicted. Like I said, the Agnus Dei, which is a very prominent thing within Catholic art, I do not support that from an Orthodox theological perspective. Well, Byzantine art is 1,000 years gone. People are still making icons, Don Don. That is Byzantine style art. So my point is that the Oh, okay. Pop culture has been degenerate since the Renaissance. Um, I can certainly have some sympathies with that perspective. That since the Renaissance, again, the Renaissance is where the Neoplatonism, a lot of the Hermetic and the magic starts getting influenced into culture. Secret societies start to develop about 100, 150 years later. Yeah, I can generally accept that pop culture, but I mean there's still good stuff, right? I mean there's still good stuff being produced right now. So we just have to be nuanced in our perspective. We can't just be too overgeneralistic. But your sentiment that much, the sort of movement of the masses has been towards degeneracy. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I do agree with that. I don't see I don't see how you can argue against it, really. I mean, even in the movement away from the Renaissance degeneracy of the papacy, we have the Protestant Reformation, and then we get theological changes that influence the presuppositions that allow for the Enlightenment, that allow for the culture we live in now. So, not the greatest thing in the world. So Don, now that you kind of clarify, I get what you're saying, and I think that there's certainly areas where we're going to agree on. But I think for us as Christians, for us as Orthodox, for us, maybe interested in Christianity or interested in Orthodoxy, we have to begin beautifying our culture. One is beautifying ourselves. Get yourself into shape. If you are a slob and you're a mess, you can't change the world. You can't change. This maybe were something we would agree with Jordan Peterson. You got to clean yourself up a bit, because that represents a lot. Like you represent the ideas that you hold. And so when people encounter you, what do they see? What do they feel? And that's going to affect the way in which they receive the ideas that you put forth. And so we have to beautify ourselves. We have to beautify our spaces. Then we have to beautify the world through art, through things that we create. Oh, Nick threw in another $4.99. Nick Offinger said, again, thank you so much, brother. I really, really appreciate it. That's $10. He said, you should reach out to James Fox Higgins. His YouTube channel is RRTV. Orthodox, smart Australian dude making music for Christ. Would be an epic conversation. Okay, I had no idea. Let me pull him up real quick. Maybe at least type it in, just so I don't forget. James Fox Higgins. James Fox Higgins. Yeah, I'm totally down. James Fox Higgins, YouTube. Nice. Yeah, I'll definitely check his stuff out. I'll definitely check his stuff out. Thanks for the heads up, Nick. Yeah, I'll reach out to him. I'm all for more art, guys. So if you guys know, anybody, I'm all for giving. My platform is to, if you know people that are on the same wavelength as us, feel free to shoot me emails, recommend people coming on. I'm all for it. We're trying to spread a message. We're trying to grow. We're trying to build here, right? Everything is about building. Christ was a carpenter, and at a semiotic level, a carpenter is somebody who builds, and that's what we need to do now. We need to take that on. The godly build. We need to build. Matthew Turkey said, on psychedelics, you can feel that the experience is ethereal, but more often it is demonic in tone, not necessarily scary, but carnal desires are amplified, especially if taken with others. Stay safe. Yeah, I can definitely see that, Matthew Turkey. I could see that. And I think that's why then the psychedelic culture is so okay with a lot of the degeneracy that the people, you guys watching this channel, we would probably disagree with, is because it does, well, the movement towards emotion, I think, leads people to things more carnal. So whether that be postmodern epistemology and the social justice warriors and progressives in America, generally speaking, with their emotionalism, or psychedelics, that the movement towards emotion being the mechanism in which you make decisions is always going to lead towards degeneracy and more carnality, the more of a carnal yearning. So I pretty much agree with you there, bud. That carnal desires are amplified. Uh, and so it's funny because for them, they would, again, even if you said that to me 5 years ago, I would be, oh no, you're crazy, because no, when I go into these altered states, I'm thinking about unity. I'm thinking about how we're all one. I'm transcending the categories and the limitations of culturally constructed religions and all this stuff. That's what I would have said. But I totally agree with you that it does lead to more carnal desires. It does lead to emotionalism. Therefore, it leads to subjectivism. Therefore, it leads to epistemological relativism. Therefore, it leads to cuties. It leads to the normalization. I mean, I just got to say something real quick. I tweeted about this. You know the Elijah Schaffer guy who claims to be a California conservative? Can you believe that dude had a conversation with Blair White, which is a dude who thinks he's a chick, and that he had him on to talk about pedophiles and then cuties, and not realizing that, guys, the normalization of homosexuality, the normalization of transgenderism, they're all tied with the normalization of pedophilia. The fact that the dude doesn't grasp that is amazing. These presuppositions build on top of each other because they violate an objective reality or objective normalcy in the name of the way people feel. Love is love. Well, I feel this way. I feel this way towards this man, therefore we're going to engage in sodomy. I feel this way towards this child, and therefore I'm going to manipulate this child and try to convince it that it actually wants this, and I'm going to rape it. I feel that I'm a female, and therefore I'm going to cut off the sexual apparatus that was given to me by God, by nature, in favor of some man-made manipulation monstrosity, and I'm going to call myself something that I'm not. Guys, these are all tied together at a presuppositional level, and so the fact that Elijah Schaffer dude has it shows you the state of conservativity, or conservatives, conservative, whatever. I was trying to work that word in there, but it's mind blowing. It's mind blowing to see where we're at as society. I can't believe it. Nate Armstrong said, "I'm breaking the ego mirror, bro." I know, right? That's another thing, is the ego, like the whole destruction, of the ego that people believe they're doing on the psychedelics is really a reinforcement of the ego that they don't have the ego. Because they believe themselves to be right? That how angry does the no ego hippie get when you're against homosexuality or transgenderism or whatever things that they're for? Global climate change, bro. Like, who's the one with the ego? And first of all, the ego isn't bad. We have to get out of and again, a lot of it's perpetuated by the spiritual, not religious, or the New Age, psychedelics. That the ego, or even Eastern tradition, somehow the ego is the thing that's the worst. Now, the ego can be bad. I mean, I think the original sin of Lucifer, wanting to be God, is a sense of ego run amok. But the ego has to submit in a humble way to the will of God. That is the whole Christian tradition. So humility is essential. But if you don't have a self and you're, not, like, you have to have you have to be somebody. You have to want to be somebody. I don't see scripture telling us that your ego is the part that needs to be destroyed about yourself. Because almost what that does is make you a sort of automaton. You're like all the other people that don't have an ego. And so really you sort of lose your personhood in a way. I mean, I know that's a little extreme, but in a way you can kind of see that. Yeah, California conservative equals liberal. Definitely. When I heard him call himself a California conservative, I died. Just call yourself a liberal. Exactly, JKXY. Nate, good to see you, brother. Yeah, Mush Love is he's very triggered about comments with mushrooms, and that's why, Mush Love, dude, don't you realize that you're obsessed with something that's created? Like, you think something in creation can give you ultimate conceptions about. I'm not talking about drugs. I'm talking about entheogens. They are drugs, and entheogens is a dumb concept which already validates your worldview that somehow you are God. So I don't even use the term entheogens because that violates the worldview that I'm not God. I'm not God. I'm not the creator of the universe. So entheogen, that's why I don't use the term entheogens in my academic work talking about psychedelics. Oh, yeah, id bad. Well, that definitely can that can go into a different place. Yes, exactly. Entheogens are drugs. Entheogens are just a term that was developed to differentiate, which means God within entheogens, or psychedelic means mind manifesting. These are two terms. Entheogens was a term later developed to sort of differentiate the term psychedelic for a more spiritual purpose. But it's all the same thing. I mean, come on. Entheogen, like, you're not God. And you have to be more. You have to be a little bit more strenuous in the way that we analyze our experiences and what to be true. You are wrong, man. Okay, we'll agree to disagree, but I guarantee you, if we began to debate, you're going to have many problems justifying your worldview, because it's ultimately going to become contradictory, especially if you think that mushrooms give you an ultimate sense of reality, and somehow the whole point is to realize that, and then realize that you are God, and gain your own divinity, and all this stuff. So I guess we can just agree to disagree. Crack ain't no drug, it's a stimulant. Vendetta. Carl Jung was right. But Mush Love says, but then we can say that everything is drugs, and what you eat is what affects you and your development. Like, again, that's just basically relativism put in terms of materiality. No, not everything is drugs. Yes, everything you consume can affect you. That does not mean that everything you consume is a mind-altering substance that can radically change your perception of things within the next hour or so. Those aren't the same thing. Me eating steak and drinking a cup of coffee, because I know Terrence McKenna, one of his things was to equivocate caffeine with psychedelics as the sort of problematic nature of drug categories. But no, like, that's not the same thing. Okay. Well, anyways, guys, if you guys like what I'm trying to do on this YouTube channel, if you appreciate what I'm trying to do in these live streams, and you would like to support, the number one way to do that would be to go to my website, davidpatrickcarey.com, churchoftheeternallogos.com, leads you to the same place. You can see it displayed on the screen there. And in the top right-hand corner, there is a donate button that you can potentially set something up monthly. I ask just $5 a month. A cup of coffee really goes a long way for the project here on this YouTube channel, and I would greatly, greatly, greatly appreciate it if you could do that. And if you guys haven't, please smash that like button. It definitely helps with the algorithm. If you know anybody who'd be interested in this sort of content, talking about psychedelics, talking about cautionary tales, my own stories, definitely feel free to share. And Much Love says, thank you and God bless you all. Much Love, thank you, brother. Like, the respectful spirit that you, even though we disagree, I appreciate that. I appreciate your respect. I appreciate your generosity and perception. No name calling. So thank you, Much Love. I appreciate that. We certainly disagree in the ultimacy of the psychedelic experience, but hopefully, maybe we can continue to chat, and I can eventually convince you otherwise, or not. But I appreciate your respect and your generosity. Yes, everybody, please subscribe if you haven't. Also, I never say this, but I've been told I really need to start can you guys click that bell? If you guys get notifications and you haven't clicked the bell yet for my channel, I'd greatly appreciate that. That will let you know whenever I come on. So please do that. Again, like I said, if you guys know anybody who'd be interested in this kind of content, feel free to share it with them. Sharing lets me know that you care. Share if you care. Again, please smash that like button. And thank you much. And go to Vesper if you can. Oh, Pano threw in $5. Thank you very much, Pano. He says, ego destruction is a modern form of the monothelite and monoenergism heresy that St. Maximus fought against. Oh, very interesting. Very interesting point, Pano. Wow. That is good. That was a good angle. I hadn't thought about that. That is some good stuff. Well, I'm going to read that again. So Pano, fellow Hoosier over in Lafayette, good ortho bro. We still need to meet, man. We still need to have lunch one of these days. He said, ego destruction is a modern form of the monothelite and monoenergism heresy that St. Maximus fought against. I think I agree with that. That is a very good point. Great job. Nice, Pano. So, yeah, thank you for the $5, brother. I really appreciate that. I appreciate everybody. Again, Eugen, Block Party Vintage, Nick, Nick, good ortho, bro. Josh, thank you very much for the $5. And Pano, thank you for the $5. I really appreciate that, guys. I really, really, really do. So thank you very much. Again, anybody who wants to support, please go to my website, again, and just set up a $5 a month payment. That's all I ask. It goes a very long way, and I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. Where can I read more of St. Maximus? Oh, Marco. Well, you could start with his Wikipedia if you want to know more about him, but I would recommend just this little bit because he's got a lot of stuff, so you don't need to get the whole library of St. Maximus, but this little book right here called On the Cosmic Mystery of Jesus Christ is really going to help you understand the logos-logoi distinction. This is a great beginner into St. Maximus. St. Maximus is arguably one of my favorite church fathers. His discussion on logos and logos theology was a big deal for me in getting into orthodoxy. It just made so much sense. It was so beautiful. It's so concise. I mean, again, these people, they didn't have paper like we do, so they don't just ramble on and just real wordy for no reason. They actually are concise in their writings, and it's fun to read older stuff. So Block Party Vintage said, God bless you all. God bless you and yours, Block Party Vintage. Thank you very much again for the super chat, and hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. And I think that's it. It seems like people are kind of bouncing out, and I don't see any more questions. So thank you guys so much for all the love and support. I truly, truly appreciate it. I really do. If you guys would like to support, again, check out my website, davidpatrickcarey.com, churchoftheeternallogos.com, and I would greatly appreciate it. This $5 a month goes a very, very long way. So anyways, with that being said, I am going to what is that blue book, David? It's On the Cosmic Mystery of Jesus Christ by St. Maximus Confessor. But if you're interested in St. Maximus, I recommend that book. Yes. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Love you. And as always,